I'm just going to double check my Discord settings, but that hasn't gone awry in a while.
Awry?
Awry. I make that mistake all the time.
Is that one of those words that you read before you heard it?
Yeah. I never... like the first time I said it out loud, everybody looked at me weird. It's that, but it's just stuck there like that now.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick. Chapter 13, and our symbol is the Shreddit, or elephant face. A small room in Sienda. I loved reading this, by the way, because Nynaeve's one of my favorites.
You know, on the rereads, I gotta say, yeah, Lumen's about to call me out. He said, I can tell we're entering some of Seth's favorite material, and you are totally right. Like, I love the circus. I love the interpersonal stuff. Like, people hate the circus, and I'm like, ooh, now we really get to see Nynaeve and all the fucking Aes Sedai interact, and like, oh, you have no idea how often I've been listening to this stuff on repeat on audiobook. It's just been book 5 and 6. It's going to be great. I've got a huge grin on my face.
At some point, I forget if it's in 13 or 14, we'll get to it, but Nynaeve calls Elayne willful, and Elayne is like yelling about it in her head, like, me, willful, me? And then, but the three of all, like, Egwene, Nynaeve, and Elayne are all like that. They're all like that. They just, no one can see it in themselves, and it's, I don't know, it's just a little comment on all human interaction, you know? You see other people's flaws, you don't see yours as well.
No, especially when they're the exact same flaws that you have.
Right.
I gotta say, that's one of the biggest realizations for me in high school. Man, I used to hate people. They drive me nuts. I'd be like, why the fuck do I hate this kid? They drive me crazy. And I really, really can't stand them. And over time, as I matured, I realized what I hated in them was things I hated about myself that I recognized in them.
Yeah.
And as I've come to hate myself less and, like, you know, do less stupid shit and, like, and understand that what I'm I'm like, oh, I was a terrible, terrible person in high school, as most of us were.
Well, and to be fair, yeah, pretty much all teenagers are terrible, so.
But that I do think that a lot of hatred is seeing your own flaws in somebody else. That, and the White Cloaks especially show symptoms of that. But you see that in a lot of the characters in the Wheel of Time.
Elayne held herself against the swaying of the coach on its leather hinges, trying to ignore Nynaeve's sour face across from her. The curtains were drawn back, despite a sprinkling of dust that sometimes whipped through the windows. The breeze blew away some of the late afternoon heat. Rolling, forested hills streamed past, the woods occasionally broken by short stretches of farmland. A lord's manor, in the fashion of Amadisha, topped one of the hills a few miles from the road, a huge stone foundation 50 feet high, with an elaborate wooden structure atop that, all ornate balconies and red tile roofs. Once, it all would have been stone, but many years had passed since a lord needed a fortress in Amadisha, and the king's law now required the wooden construction. No rebel lord would be able to hold out against the king for long. Of course, the Children of the Light were exempted from that law. They were immune to a number of Amadishan laws. She had to learn something of the laws and customs of other countries from the time she was a child. Cleared fields dotted the distant hills, too, like brown patches on a mostly green cloth, the men working them seeming ants. Everything looked dry. One bolt of lightning would have set a fire that could burn for leagues, but lightning meant rain, and the few clouds in the sky were too high and thin for that. Idly, she wondered whether she could make it rain. She had learned considerable control over weather. Still, it was very difficult if you had to begin with nothing. "Is my lady bored?" Nynaeve asked acidly. "The way my lady is staring at the countryside, down my lady's nose. I think my lady must want to travel faster." Reaching back over her head, she pushed open a small flap and shouted, "More speed, Tom! Don't argue with me! You hold your tongue too, jewel and thief catcher! I said more speed!" The wooden flap banged down, but Elayne could still hear Tom muttering loudly, cursing, very likely. Nynaeve had been barking at the men all day. A moment later, his whip cracked, and the coach and the coach racketed ahead even faster, rocking so hard that both women bounced on the golden-colored silk seats. The silk had been thoroughly dusted when Tom bought the vehicle, but the padding had long since gone hard. Yet, jounced about as she was, the set of Nynaeve's jaw said she would not ask Tom to slow again right after ordering him to go faster. "Please, Nynaeve," Elayne said. The other woman cut her off. "Is my lady uncomfortable? I know ladies are used to comfort, the sort of thing a poor maid wouldn't know about. But surely my lady wants to make the next town before dark, so my lady's maid can serve my lady's supper and turn down my lady's bed." Her teeth clicked shut as the seat coming up met her coming down, and she glowered at Elayne as though it were her fault.
I mean, she's laying it on
yeah.
thick.
My lady.
I do wonder, though, how much do you think Elayne deserves a little bit of mocking every once in a while?
I think everybody does. And Elayne does look down her nose at stuff. And
she has arrogance bred into her bones. Sometimes I'm not even sure she's aware she's doing it. But at the same time, Nynaeve here is being childish and gets called out for it.
And we see, over the next page, Elayne is remembering a night or two before that when they had stopped at an inn, and Nynaeve is supposed to be, obviously, playing Elaine's lady's maid, or, personal, whatever you call that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go into this inn a couple of nights before, and the owner of the inn starts, essentially instructing Nynaeve where things are, or Nana, as her name is, or her fake name is supposed to be.
Which is a terrible fake name,
here's the brush so you can scrub your lady's back in the tub, and you can get water, the well's over here, and you can heat it over there, and Nynaeve's just, sweating and twitching and trying not to say anything. But of course, then she gets all uppity about it, for lack of a better term, and starts resenting Elayne because she has to do all this work because she has to put on the show, and it's carrying over. She's not having to play this role.
She hates being a servant. She hates not being the one in charge, not being the one who makes the calls. And even if she can do it in private.
Yeah, at the end of the next page. As long as they had been in Bellin, the town that they had stopped in, Nynaeve had acted the perfect lady's maid in public. In private was another matter.
Sorry, the comments in the Discord are making me laugh. The na-na-na-na-na-na Nynaeve. I find it really funny. But that's banana-na-na-na-na, where you don't really know where to stop putting the ends in.
Yeah. And then RJ's really driving it home, the kind of point that I was making before I did the read-in, where just after that, from Elaine's perspective, she would not ask for the coach to be slowed, though. She could stand it as long as Nynaeve did. That woman was so stubborn.
Right. Just within one sentence.
Yeah.
Showing just how unself-aware he is. He loves those little, the pot calling the kettle black sentences, where they're I can stand up to her, she's so stubborn, or I can stand up as long as her, or I won't yell at you, she yelled, or, I'll tell you the truth, she lied. I don't know, stuff like that happens all the time in the books. I love it. I also note that we're getting, early mentions of hot weather here. It's just sort of rolling that in now that the fires of heaven are going on. We're in summer, so it makes sense that it's hot, but this heat is actually more intense and going to continue into the winter as the Dark One is sort of driving that forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. These are kind of our first mentions of how dry it is, which at first doesn't seem weird, like you said.
You're oh, it's summer. Of course, it's just a dry summer. He's setting the setting, but he's also setting up for the Dark One's touch on the world and just giving you these little clues. And I love how subtle he is, just dropping these in early. And
to be fair to Elayne, over the following page, she kind of dresses Nynaeve down a little, but she also says, I did not ask you to wash my back, but I would have had to wrestle to stop you. I did offer to scrub yours in turn, remember, and I offered to sleep on the trundle bed, which, if anyone doesn't know, is literally like a bed. It's like a pallet that pulls out from underneath a bed where your servant sleeps, or where one servant would sleep. And so Nynaeve is how do I say this? storing up her resentment and jealousy and kind of beating Elayne with it by, like, being the maid even harder. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, yeah. Then using it as a weapon against Elayne, which is ridiculous because, like Elayne said, you know, you just have to pretend while people are looking. It's not like she has to be her maid all the time when they're in private or whatever.
Right. And I'll make it up for you in private, but you're not letting me do that.
Yeah.
You're being stubborn. One thing I note here is this is a question I had earlier, but they talk about back in Mistress Mikura's shop, they filled the two women with their own horrible concoction. So it seems like fork root tea will knock out even non-channelers if you give it to them in a big enough dose.
Yeah, I think the last time we were talking about it, we decided it was just a lot more.
Yeah.
Oh, Aradia says about 5 times as much as it does for a channeler, to knock out a channeler.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
And it's kind of mentioned offhandedly later, but Nynaeve also, while leaving, took a bunch of fork root and, like, filled her herb satchel with everything she could get from Mikura's shop.
That's a handy little way to tell and disable channelers.
Yeah, I mean, could certainly come in handy. And also, Nynaeve she's aided a bit by having those herbs that she can... It helps her focus and be a better healer.
And also, she likes to use the herbs anyway. Sometimes channeling isn't the appropriate response.
Yeah. I don't think you need a full body healing for, like, something that ibuprofen would handle, you know? Or willow bark or whatever.
Aradia is saying that she took everything but the fork root.
Oh, she didn't take it? Oh, you know what? I think the line that I'm thinking of was something like, there's nothing in here to help with sleep later, or there was nothing in Mikura's shop to help with sleep other than the fork root. So I just assumed she had taken it, but maybe she didn't.
They're kind of disgusted by it.
I mean, I wouldn't blame them. I would feel pretty weird about taking it, but it could come in handy. I don't know. Do they ever use fork root on someone else?
Perrin certainly does. I don't think the girls do.
Yeah.
Perrin flushes it through the aqueduct system to take out the Shido.
Aradia says they use it on Moghedian in the dream. That's right, I think I remember
That's true. Yeah, that's right. And the Shan Shan, once they learned about it, they make everyone try a little fork root. And that they're like finding a ton of channelers that way.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. And Anna brings up a good point. It's very important that Nynaeve knows how to heal without channeling. Because, you know, last battle, the whole saving of Alana's life in order to prevent Rand from essentially suiciding. Because she can't channel during the last battle. She cannot channel during the last battle because she's linked with Rand through Kalendor.
Right, so she's just a
healer.
Faucet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so all she has is her herbs to keep Alana alive, and the herbs are what gives Alana the lucidity to release Rand from the bond, so he's not affected when she dies. And this is sort of the restoration of her carrying the herbs around with her.
Well, the cart's crashing along. Nynaeve eventually yells at Tom to slow down. What the hell is he thinking going so fast?
And the guys are like, you told us to go faster! Gah! I can just hear Tom screaming in his head. I can just hear it.
And before, I have a short read when they kind of run into the circus along the road, but in a second. But there's an important conversation here where, who's talking? Elayne, I think, says, you know, we're rushing back to Tar Valon, but do we really have any idea what awaits us in the tower, especially considering the message and what just happened to us? Maybe that doesn't seem like such a good idea, actually. Should we really be moving so quickly before we even know what we're running toward? And great point.
Yeah.
Also, Nynaeve says we may learn more if, you know, we see any other signs like that, but until then, I think we should behave as though the Black Aja itself has control of the tower. Also wise.
Yes, because it does. I mean, the Black Aja is, you know, Alviarin, who has total control over Elaida shortly after this. And, you know, besides that, there's like a quarter of the Aes Sedai who are actually in the tower are Black Aja.
Elaida's a proxy, and like half of her advisors are Black Aja. And she's, you know, a jerk anyway. So she's not black herself, but...
And not to mention, you got Ishmael having influence, and you've got Delana, a.k.a. Messana, hanging out, making things happen in the tower.
Yeah.
You should definitely treat the tower as a dangerous, dangerous place.
It would not be good for them had they shown up to the tower. Of course, they don't. They never do. Well, not anytime soon.
And then just a random side, you notice they talked about bounce here, which is a ball on a paddle attached with like a rubber string, which is like
bouncing. Yeah.
I had never noticed that before. It's like, oh, they play paddleball. That's cute.
Abruptly, the coach lurched to a halt, throwing Elayne forward on top of Nynaeve. She could hear horses screaming and thrashing as she frantically untangled herself, Nynaeve pushing her off as well. Embracing Saidar, she put her head out of the window, and released it again in relief. Here was something of a sort she had seen pass through Camelin more than once. A traveling menagerie was camped amid afternoon shadows in a large clearing by the side of the road. A great, black-maned lion lay half asleep in one cage that took up the entire back of a wagon, while his two consorts paced in the confines of another. A third cage stood open. In front of it, a woman was making two black bears with white faces balance themselves on big red balls. Another cage held what appeared to be a large, hairy boar, except that its snout was too pointed, and it had toes with claws. That came from the Aiel waste, she knew. It was called a capar. I'm going to interrupt myself really quick. Is that like an anteater? An armadillo? I'm trying to think of what kind of looks like a boar, but has a longer snout and claws.
I really don't know.
Guessing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's... Anteater kind of sounds right to me, but it could be any number of animals.
I don't know. Other cages held other animals, and brightly colored birds. But unlike any menagerie she had ever seen, this one traveled with human performers. 2 men were juggling ribbon-twined hoops between them. 4 acrobats were practicing standing on one another's shoulders in a tall column, and a woman was feeding a dozen dogs that walked on their hind legs and did backflips for her. In the background, some other men were putting up 2 tall poles. She had no idea what they were for. None of that was what had the horses rearing in their harness and rolling their eyes, though. Despite all that Tom could do with the reins, she could smell the lions herself, but it was at 3 huge, wrinkled gray animals that the horses gazed, wild-eyed. 2 were as tall as the coach, with big ears and great curving tusks beside a long nose that dangled to the ground. The third, shorter than the horses, if likely as heavy, had no tusks. A baby, she supposed. A woman with pale yellow hair was scratching that one behind the ear with a heavy, hooked goad. Elayne had seen creatures like this before, too, and had never expected to see them again. 'Cause they're Shan Shan animals.
Right. And they supposedly have fled, but they fled so fast they left a bunch of people behind, and a bunch of animals behind.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember here... maybe you guys could help me out. What are the Shreddit used for? I assume in the Shan Shan army? Are they like war animals or are they like pack animals?
They're definitely war elephants.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
I just know in real life, humans have used them for either. They're great at you can cut down a tree and an elephant can just drag it to wherever you want it to go.
I mean, Shan Shan use all
Super
their
useful.
Animals as war animals. Essentially, like the whole last battle is like they sweep in and they send in their animals to just slaughter the Trollocs.
Yeah,
and they send in like the bird-like things, the cat-like things, the the elephant, and like just because elephants are one of the few real animals they still use them as powerful, essentially tanks.
Yeah, I mean that's what they are. And then Valan Luca. In the next paragraph.
Yes. Valan Luca, who's not married at this point, but does get married later.
Tall, dark-haired man. Of all things wearing a red silk cloak that he flourished as he made an elegant bow. Nynaeve, or is it Elayne? I think this might be from Nynaeve's perspective. Thinks he's good-looking.
Which is interesting, because he's constantly flirting with Nynaeve. He spends... she pisses him off, and he can't get enough of her. She thinks he's super attractive, all into Nynaeve the whole freaking time.
Yeah, I wasn't sure in this scene. He says, "Forgive me, my lady, the giant boar horse has frightened your animals," and he's being all whatever. And then he pauses and turns to the side kind of and murmurs, "Be still, my heart." But Elayne thinks it's about her, but what we were just talking about is it? You just said it's Nynaeve that he's chasing after the whole time, not Elayne.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, yeah. No, he's totally into like the harsh
tough
mistress.
girls. Yeah, all right.
Exactly, the ones who are gonna yell at him. Already saying like Littell is totally someone who keeps him in line, and like whenever he gets out of line, she just hits him with a stick, basically.
It seems like he could use the discipline, to be honest.
Exactly, but he would do really well in Ebu Dar. That's all I'm gonna say.
Serving women instead of
totally, as someone's pretty,
creeping.
He's very pretty, very flamboyant. He's a walking stereotype, and he's inventing the circus, right? Like, one of the things I really love about this part of the Wheel of Time is Robert Jordan starts to take us through the invention of modern society. And one of the ways he does that is through the invention of guns, the invention of trains, and here the invention of the modern circus, right? Taking a menagerie of animals, adding human performers. And at one point we see like the big tent circus when he's like, all these little tents, like if I just had one big tent I could put up instead of having to depend on buildings or any of that, like,
yeah,
it's just one of those sort of things that really makes the world of the Wheel of Time fleshed out and makes it more than another medieval setting. Like the Two Rivers very much is.
And it starts to make it recognizable. He's got the strongest man in the world, and everyone I know has probably seen that performance at some point,
sure,
or something like that.
Yeah. So I love the circus in terms of its world building. It really does bring a lot of things together and makes Randland a different place than some of the other generic fantasy worlds that I've read. And so I think there's a lot more value in the circus and Valan Luca and all the cultural stuff that happens sort of when we're not having major battles. I love it.
Luca's the perfect ringmaster, too. He's flamboyant and flourishing his cape and,
attractive and tall and dark-haired and
like if you took
boisterous.
Tom and just brought Tom to the most egregious level possible,
right.
It just...
Perhaps if Tom was 50 or 40 years younger or something like that, he would have been a lot, and not a court bard.
Yeah.
He would have been a lot like Valan Luca. Where do you think Valan Luca got to start? Do you think he was a tinker? Do you think he was... Where's his origin story? I actually could not tell you that.
I don't know. Just laughing at radio right now. You want the Valan Luca fanfic, like his origin story? That could be really fun. I like the idea of thinking him as kind of a tinker that strayed, but he still has a very, I guess, peaceful, nonviolent life. He's just an entertainer rather than a...
Exactly. And nationality unknown, but he would have started by being this tinker and he would have turned to his wagons, and that would have explained his, desire for flamboyant clothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. I'm headcanoning Valan Luca as a reformed former tinker.
Yeah, there's like everything that I can find is a stub. It's just like a few sentences about him.
We get very, very little backstory on him. He sort of just exists as he is, sort of plucked out of society. Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot about this. There's a great fan art, but this was registered fan art of Edsel Arnold did Valan Luca. I love that guy's stuff. It's different than some of the other portraits.
It's very stylized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the difference, Bambi wants us to compare him to Aram, and there is that sort of like one tinker goes one way and the other one, one went light and one goes dark.
I like that idea. Elayne asks about, she says, boar horses, Master Luca, Elayne said. Where do they come from? And Luca gives him... Well, first of all, he corrects her. Giant boar horses, my lady. From fabled Shara, where I myself led an expedition into the wilderness full of strange civilization and stranger sights to trap them.
Liar!
Yeah, he just launches into this ridiculous story, which is all a lie. Yeah, and Elayne knows that it's a lie.
Right, because these are from...
Shan Shan.
Shan Shan. And she saw them at Falma, and... Yeah, he made up the name Giant Boar Horses because it's a stupid name because no one can say Shred It. They're like, that's a stupid one. But he's, he tells a story that people like, and the story is what gets people into the animals, right? Exotic animals from faraway lands. It's very, very circusy.
It would fascinate me to tell you of them. Gigantic people, twice the size of Ogier. He made grand gestures to illustrate. Beings with no heads. Birds big enough to carry off a full-grown bull. Snakes that can swallow a man. It goes on.
So what do you think the beings with no heads are? And people twice the size of Ogier?
I always just imagined that the old... I don't even remember how to place this. It's like an old-fashioned cartoon where it has a giant creature that's just like shoulders and its face is in its chest. But do you guys remember? And does anybody else remember that as like a big hairy monster in cartoons?
Yeah.
I don't even know how to Google that.
I feel like I remember reading at some point that gigantic people twice the size of Ogier and beings with no heads is a reference to something in like South America. Because you have these giant snakes, cities made of gold. Like I feel like there's something Aztec about it. And I feel like I read an article about it once, but I cannot. I looked for it before we started, but I couldn't find the source of that. And unfortunately, my head's just unable to pull up the details I need to find it. So if you have any idea what that's supposed to represent, because I do think it's something related to the real world. It's one of those like legends. Again, it's another legend that has passed down through the ages. In the kind of way that like Cyclops are, like you find the skull of an elephant and the hole for the tusks kind of looks like a single eye, and that's where the idea of Cyclops comes from.
I see what you mean.
You know, I feel, yeah. And like that's a legend based in reality, and I feel like there's something going on here as well.
We find out, so there's at least one Shan Shan there, and an Illuminator as well. This is a pretty good circus, guys.
I'd watch.
I'd give him a silver penny, yeah.
Well, not if I was from the Two Rivers and I only ever had one silver penny in my life, but...
Yeah. Oh, and I got ahead of myself because we didn't even get to that point yet, but over the next page, Luca's like, "Miladies, like, let me entertain you." And he's also like, "And, by the way, my elephant wrecked a building in the last town, and that was really expensive to pay for, so if you, like, please let us entertain you, and just for a small amount of money, we're kind of hurting right now." And,
trying to say, oh, these elephants, I mean, these boar horses, they're totally safe. No, they just destroyed a house. No, totally safe. Not used for war animals at all. And yeah, and this is the return of Eludra.
Yeah. Elayne thinks, "I don't have any time to pay for a show," and Nynaeve even yells something like, "We have better things to do than look at animals." Elayne, playing her part, says, like, "Give the man some coin, Nana, but we have to be on our way." And Nynaeve gives him one silver penny and slams the door in his face. And she yells to Tom to move forward. I had actually kind of forgotten this part, that they meet Luca and see the circus and move on.
Yeah, it's only later when they need a way to escape in the next town that they think of the circus again and head back.
Yeah, I had forgotten that.
Because they're running from the White Cloaks. And yeah, it sort of justifies a lot of like the contentious relationship between Valan Luca and Nynaeve going forward. Already says, and in that moment, Luca fell in love.
Yeah. Drops a penny in his hand, slams the door.
I think it's one of those things where he's like so angry and so worked up that he mistakes that for love.
Nynaeve is basically like, "Your life's work is stupid. Goodbye." Like, oh, my heart. Tells the story right there, guys. I'm not going into relationship dynamics. Oh, God, and I forgot. Nynaeve drops the penny in his hand and says to him before she slams the door, "If you took a decent job of work, you wouldn't have to beg. Drive, Tom." And then shuts the door.
And then she sort of has this backhanded compliment of, with those shoulders, a good day's work would not kill him, which means he's got, nice big shoulders. Like, she is also attracted to him, which is what... As
soon as she sees him, she's like, yeah. She thinks he's a good-looking guy, but she's not flirting.
No, well, she's totally into Lan, right? But if she wasn't into Lan, I can totally see her getting carried off by Valan Luca.
You think
if
so?
She hadn't met Lan. Oh, yeah. She thinks he's attractive, and like...
I mean, I think he would
totally
probably
into her,
worship her enough that she would appreciate him.
Right. And she would have beat him into submission. But, I mean, and the whole, like, the fact that she kind of really likes being up and displayed and having, you know, wearing pretty dress. She loves wearing pretty dresses and having people look at her and being the center of attention. And she loves being, you know, having knives thrown at her. You think she screams that well just because she's intimidated? No, she knows what she's doing.
She likes putting on the show.
She loves putting on the show.
We do see her kind of wrestling with that idea over the next chapter or so, where she's in Tel'aran'rhiod and her dress keeps changing, and she keeps thinking like, oh, I don't want to see anyone to see me like this, except Lan. And, well, I don't mind walking around like this sometimes. And she just keeps like, keeps reeling it back.
And she keeps it on.
Yeah. It's indecent. Sometimes.
And so they continue on from the circus, having shut the door, insulted Valan Luca, and assuming they were never going to see him again.
Yeah.
Yeah, mistake. And they run straight into the White Cloaks.
Yeah, they come to a little town called Sienda, where one of the inn's walls has been destroyed. Apparently, the wall that used to have a door, there's like a giant hole in it, and the sign's ripped off.
And this is where obviously the boar horse did that, and they're going in the opposite direction of the circus.
And because we're in Amadisha and not very far from the capital, but the girls avoided it, but there's just a ton of White Cloaks here. Amador, thank you, Anna. So there's a ton of White Cloaks here, and also King's Guards, for lack of a better term, or, you know, official Amadishan soldiers rather than White Cloaks, who apparently hate each other. We see that.
Everybody hates the White Cloaks.
Fair.
They're assholes.
Yeah. And they stop at the inn that has all four walls still intact, and they manage to get one room.
Which I think there's only 2 inns in the city, so it's like it's either this one or the one with the hole in the wall. So they have no choice, essentially.
They meet Mistress Jaren, the innkeeper, and Elayne plays her part as a lady well, obviously. She has no problem doing that.
So here's some speculation. She says a troop of vagabonds brought some horrible great animals into the village yesterday, and one of them quite destroyed the king's lancer, including the door with the sign on it. I have to wonder if the elephants aren't smart enough to be angry about the White Cloak Lancers in Falma, and remember that, and that's why they took out the inn.
I'm kind of glad you said that, because I had this idea in my head that, so this is kind of a divided community where there appear to be like White Cloak loyalists and loyalists to the king, and I was wondering if what was it called again? Is it called the King's Lancer?
Yes, that's correct.
So the King's Lancer is the one that got damaged, but the inn that they go into is like, I forgot the name too, but it seemed to me like there's like a White Cloak bar and a Kingsguard bar, and the two don't really mix. You know what I mean?
Totally.
That's the idea that I had in my head. I don't know if that's accurate, but
because I mean, I see that all the time in the real world, where like you go where your friends are, and so you end up with these bars. You end up with like a soccer bar and D&D bar and I don't know. You just end up with different types of people going to places because they know that's where you can find other people like you.
Yeah, in bigger cities and towns, I feel like especially, well, I'm sure this is true everywhere, but there'll be like a cop bar next to the firefighter bar, and that's like a thing that I remember in like Newark, New Jersey, or in New York City, that there would be like people congregate in a place, and it's not necessarily the owner's choice. It's just where those guys go, but it ends up being known as like, this is where the firefighters hang out, or this is a gay bar. The owner's not gay, but it just so happens that that a bunch of gay guys hang out here, and their money's just as good as anyone's.
But once you get a reputation as a kind of bar, that's hard to shake.
Yeah, and people will just congregate with, the people that they want to meet and hang out with.
And also, if there's bad blood between two groups and there's only 2 places to go.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna... It's kind of a setup, right? And if one of them is like, the King's Lancer, yeah, and you're the King's men, guess where you're gonna go?
Not to the White Cloak bar, probably.
Not to the White Cloak bar.
But in any case, the whole point, because as they are rolling through this town, they see all the White Cloaks, and they see the like mean looks between all the armed men in the city, or town rather. And Nobody wants to stay there, but they kind of look at each other and just kind of nod resignedly, knowing that they have to do something tonight. And we find out in short order that tonight is one of the nights they're supposed to meet Egwene in the dream. So they have to stop at a specific time.
Right, because if you sleep at the right time, you'll both show up at the same time, but if one of you goes to sleep earlier, it could be weird to wait until I run Riyadh, because time can stretch out. So you want to try and, like, arrange ahead of time. Like, we're both going to go to sleep at X, Y, and Z and meet then.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I have to say, other than in the readout, I did want to talk about, it is part of the readout, but Elayne asks Nynaeve the question, is there time before Egwene and the Wise Ones get there? I can never reason out what hour it is in the waste, and I was wondering how they know.
I assume they understand time zones. Like, it's not that complicated of a thing that, like, the further west you go, the earlier it gets.
Yeah, they must have some understanding. But they seem to know, and Nynaeve seems to understand that she needs to go to bed at a certain time before, or like as the sun is setting, and then perhaps, I don't know, Egwene is asleep. Egwene would be in the later time zone?
Think of Nynaeve being on the west coast and Egwene being on the east coast. Because I'm assuming the sun goes in the same direction around Randland.
So it's several hours later where Egwene is.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I should know this.
So Egwene is probably going to sleep because it's fairly late for them, but Nynaeve has to go to bed relatively early so that they're going to bed at the same time she's going to bed, so no one's standing around till Riyadh waiting for the other one to show up.
Yeah, the sun's still up as Nynaeve is laying down, and it's made pretty clear in Elayne's mind that there's maybe about an hour of sunlight left.
Also, Nynaeve protesting, I do not snore. Of course you don't, but I had to say something. And, like, it's said over and over again. She snores, she, like, throws elbows. Gotta feel sorry for Lan.
He's tough.
That's true. He can take a beating. Yeah, it's tough when you're asleep and you're just getting beat up in the middle of the night.
I think that might be me. Julia's definitely said stuff to me. I don't think I'm too bad, but I don't really stay still for long. Clad only in her linen shift, Nynaeve threaded the ring onto the leather thong with Lan's signet ring and her own great serpent, then reknotted and hung it back around her neck before lying down atop one of the beds. Carefully tucking the rings in next to her skin, she settled her head on the pillows. Is there time before Egwene and the Wise Ones get there? Elayne asked. I can never reason out what hour it is in the waste. There is time unless she comes early, which she won't. The Wise Ones keep her on a very short leash. It will do her good in the long run. She was always headstrong. Nynaeve opened her eyes, looking right at her, as if that could stand for her as well. Remember to tell Egwene to let Rand know I'm thinking of him. She was not going to let the woman start a row. Tell him that I love him and only him. There, she had said it out. Nynaeve rolled her eyes in what was really a most offensive way. If you wish me to, she said dryly, snuggling herself into the pillows. As the other woman's breathing began to slow, Elayne pushed one of the chests against the door and sat on it to wait. She always hated waiting. It would serve Nynaeve right if she went down to the common room. Tom would probably still be there, and nothing. He was supposed to be her coachman. She wondered whether Nynaeve had thought of that before agreeing to be the maid. With a sigh, she leaned back against the door. She did hate waiting. Once I read that line, I was like, I wonder if that is what she was thinking when Nynaeve agreed to be the maid.
I bet that's a big part of it.
Yeah, because if if Elayne's the lady, she can't be sitting on the coachman's lap. That is not going to fly.
It'll blow their cover.
Right.
as opposed to the other thing she wants to blow.
Oh, dear.
I'll cut that. Do you think a man would be able to use the ring Terangrial to reach Riyadh?
Oh, yeah, that comes up. I'm going to say yes.
I am as
Why
well.
Not?
Because I think it's anyone who can or cannot channel. It's just that powerful. Some of the channeling ones are that you have to channel spirit in your sleep, or obviously just for channelers, and probably just for female channelers.
That seems more likely.
But there's also the whole standing flow issue in the Age of Legends, that they reference the fact that there were standing flows that let anyone use any Terangrial at any time without being a channeler in the Age of Legends.
Right, which I always imagine this is a little ter'angreal with like a button. You press the button and it can power another ter'angreal, which you're supposed to channel into, but you get your flow of fire or your flow of spirit or whatever.
I always think of it more of like the power grid, that like it's in the air and you can cause a ter'angreal to work simply by, I don't know if you can plug it in somewhere, but like just because it's in the air, there's standing flows. You don't actually need to channel. The ter'angreal are just always plugged in, basically.
It could be. I think that's something we don't really learn too much about.
But when I think standing flow, and maybe this is where the engineering background comes in, I think of like harmonics, and when you have like a string of a certain length, you can create standing flows at different harmonics, right? So you can do a single wave, a double wave, a triple wave, and like you do that by vibrating the piece of string at one of its natural frequencies, and you create a standing wave. And that wave just sort of exists, and you can tap into it. And I'm thinking, Jordan surely knew what that was. And I think he's implying that you have this sort of standing electrical wave that exists. I mean, that's sort of what radio waves are, right? Is like these electrical waves that are...
I like it.
...existing throughout the air, and it lets you just turn on the... So I guess that's more than the power grid. The radio is a better analogy for me, right? That, you just have radio waves going everywhere, and if you want to use a ter'angreal, you can just turn it on, and it'll pick up the standing waves and be powered.
It's tuned like a radio to pick up what's there. I mean, I like that better than my idea, but I always just imagined like a cordless charger, just like Bladen just said. But like, picture an extra cell phone battery that lots of people carry around, and you just like touch a button, and it just shoots your little single weave into a ter'angreal to make it work. That's just the way I pictured it. True power radio, Bambi says. I like that.
And I think of it kind of like you have radio towers, but they're ter'angreal. Just like Farmadding has these big ter'angreal set up that have like an area effect, you have these big ter'angreal set up that create these standing waves that have this area effect that essentially create radio, like radio
That makes
towers.
sense to me. Like some cities that have public internet.
Right, exactly. And yeah, it probably only works in major cities. It probably doesn't work in all the like rural areas and stuff like that, but...
Yeah, obscure, like public Wi-Fi. I don't know. I remember there were some parks in New York City that just had Wi-Fi in the park that you could use. It's not great or anything, but it's free. Or a library.
But I'm guessing when Jordan wrote this, he was thinking of radio.
Oh, yeah. Internet wasn't really a thing yet. It was kind of...
Wi-Fi definitely wasn't a thing.
Early 90s, yeah, no.
No, there's definitely something to be said for, like, learning a lot of your vocabulary through books, and some of the smartest people I know can't pronounce some of the words they use all the time. They'll, like, say it, and you're like, I know you're using that word correctly, but you're definitely saying it wrong.
Yeah, it doesn't help that we have a mutt language, too. Me and Julia talk about this a lot. We both love this podcast called, The Illusionist, ALL, and it's a podcast about the language, basically, and it just talks about, like, it's good, it's a nice, lighthearted podcast, and she'll, like, go back through the history of, like, whatever word or a concept in English language. So the last one she released is called Words into Food, and it's all about how recipes have been written over time, and the language of explaining how to cook. It's fun. And it's lighthearted, like I said,
So I asked Fate for a game recommendation for my computer, now that I actually like have a decent computer to play games on. And I got Steam working, which took quite a bit of effort, but it's working. So I can play Steam games, which is very exciting for me.
Cool.
And so I'm playing Borderlands 2. which is kind of a blast. I will admit, like a little bit of a first-person shooter. It's like
RPG type?
Yeah, it's an RPG first-person shooter. So it's sort of like you can level up the more you shoot, and then you do more damage and have more health. So you progress through the world, and it's fairly linear, but the graphics are pretty. It's sort of cel-shading type graphics. Just enjoying playing a modern video game. Like, I can't remember the last time I played a game that was released. I know most people laugh at me for calling Borderlands 2 modern.
Well, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
You know, I have a couple of old games that I go back to when I'm looking to like kill some time and totally zen out, but I don't want to buy a console because I'll feel more inclined to use it, to be frank, and I know that I'll waste days and days and days. I know that I am fully capable.
I'm there. You know, I play a fair amount of Minecraft because that's what I could play, and it is very soothing to me, and I do really enjoy it. But I just wanted to see if there was a game out there that I could really push the video card with and see what the game could do. And it's pretty
Cool.
I probably won't play for very long. It was a $5 purchase.
Oh, well, I'm not knocking it. I just know that it's a slippery slope for me, you know.
Yeah, well, that's for me as well. And if you notice, there haven't been a lot of episodes coming out recently. Damn it.
It's same as like buying an oversized bottle of whiskey. Like, the more whiskey I buy, the more I'll drink. So buy a little. You know what I mean? I try to do it that way. Right. I can't drink it if I don't have it.
That's how I am with food. That's why I really don't have any food in the house. Because if I don't buy it, I can't like get the munchies and eat all of it.
Same kind of thing. That's why I don't buy, like, I'll love a good bag of Doritos, but if I buy that family-sized bag, I will eat the entire thing. And so I just don't buy them.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?